The story begins with a tense scene. A man stands in front of my wife, a gun aimed squarely at her face. His hands are shaking, eyes wide, puffed up with all the fake authority of a wannabe cop. But here's the twist he doesn't know. My wife isn't just any woman jogging in the neighborhood. She's Delta Force, just back from a mission 2 days ago. The guy holding the gun has no idea who he's dealing with. In an instant, everything about this confrontation is about to change, and it's not going to go the way he thinks. Now, let's set the scene. We moved to this peaceful suburban neighborhood, thinking we'd found the perfect spot. Quiet streets, white picket fences, families everywhere. It looked like a dream. But it didn't take long to realize something was off. There was the HOA, led by Karen Brewster, who seemed like she was trying to run a small dictatorship. She was everywhere, enforcing rules like no drying laundry outdoors and grass can't be more than 2.75 inches tall. And then there were the golf carts, the home safety division, as they called it. The carts were decked out like something from a bad action movie, with flashing blue lights and makeshift sirens. These people weren't just annoying, they were ridiculous. They took themselves way too seriously. And the whole thing had this eerie, almost comedic feel, like a bad sitcom set in a neighborhood that had lost its mind. The main players in this story are me, my wife, and of course, the HOA. My wife, the cool, calm professional, had just come home from a high-stakes mission and was eager for peace. She's trained for situations like this, but in our new home, the most dangerous thing she thought she'd face was a garden gnome. As for me, I'm the total opposite. A cybersecurity nerd who prefers sitting indoors and solving problems through code, not confrontation. Then there's Karen Brewster, the HOA president. She's not someone you'd expect to lead a neighborhood. She's more the type to boss people around with laminated badges and clipboards, always acting like she's in charge. And her police force, well, let's just say they weren't the kind of people you'd want to see running your neighborhood security. We moved to this neighborhood because we were looking for something simple and peaceful. After years of my wife being deployed for high-stakes missions, and me stuck behind a screen coding, we were both craving a quieter life. No more constant noise or chaos, just a chance to enjoy the kind of normal life we'd never really had. My wife, who spent more time in war zones than I care to count, wanted a calm place to jog, plant a garden, and maybe even start a chicken coop. And me? I just wanted a basement with fast internet and a comfortable chair. It seemed like the perfect place to unwind. But of course, that's not how things turned out. Right from the start, we should have known something was off. The neighborhood wasn't just private, like the brochure said. It was bizarre. The HOA here took security to an absurd level. They had golf carts driving around everywhere with flashing blue lights and sirens. It was like someone had decided to create a small-town SWAT team, but with less training and more DIY attitude. These guys had signs on their carts that said Home Safety Division, as if they were some kind of official police force. The HOA even had rules that seemed more like they were written for a weird dystopian movie, like how no one was allowed to dry laundry outside. Seriously. And don't even get me started on the grass rules. Your lawn couldn't be more than 2.75 inches tall. It was as if the whole neighborhood was built on a foundation of overly strict regulations and misguided attempts at authority. The first time we met Karen, the HOA president, was an experience I'll never forget. She introduced herself with way too much enthusiasm, practically shoving a laminated badge in my face like she was a secret agent. She handed us a welcome packet with an entire booklet of rules. I flipped it open and found a list of bizarre things we were expected to follow, like no drying laundry outside, keeping grass shorter than 2.75 inches, and, my personal favorite, the rule that said residents must not appear intimidating during recreational activities. When I asked her what that meant, she just smiled and said, "You'll know it when you see it." I had a hard time not laughing in her face. Meanwhile, my wife, who could probably take down a small army, just smiled politely and nodded, acting like she didn't just come from a mission where lives were on the line. That's when I realized we weren't just in a regular neighborhood. We'd walked into some kind of absurd HOA run by a woman who took herself way too seriously. It was a typical morning when my wife decided to go for a jog around the neighborhood. She slipped on her hoodie, tied her shoes, and headed out the door for a quick, peaceful run. She'd been home for a few days after her last mission and had been enjoying the quiet life. Meanwhile, I was in my office, drinking coffee and coding away. Just another day for me. No tension, no surprises. Little did I know, that was about to change fast. It started innocently enough. My wife was jogging down the street when, out of nowhere, 2 golf carts from the HOA's Home Safety Division appeared. They were parked across the street, blocking her way, their flashing lights going off like they were a real police unit. She stopped, confused, wondering what this was all about. One of the officers got out, a middle-aged guy with a potbelly squeezed into a tactical vest. He walked up to her, pulled out a gun, and pointed it at her chest. He started shouting at her, demanding identification for suspicious activity. The neighborhood was supposedly a restricted zone, and apparently, running without a badge made you suspicious. My wife, completely unfazed, just stood there, watching him, slightly amused by the ridiculousness of it all. What happened next was a blur. My wife, calm and collected as ever, assessed the situation in an instant. She didn't panic or try to reason with him. She just moved, fast and precise. Before the guy could even blink, she had disarmed him, his gun flying out of his hand and landing a few feet away. Within seconds, he was on the ground, pinned in a hold so tight he couldn't move. She didn't even break a sweat. From my office, I could see it all unfold on the security camera feed. I stood there, shocked, as I watched her handle the situation with military precision. My wife wasn't just calm. She was like a force of nature, making it look easy while I was still processing what had just happened. When the real police showed up, it was game over for the HOA's security team. They quickly realized they had messed with the wrong person. The fake officers tried to argue, but their authority crumbled as soon as the real cops took control. My wife stood there, completely relaxed, as the HOA officers were brushed aside. The whole thing was over almost as quickly as it had started. I could hardly believe what I had just seen, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end here. The HOA had just met someone they could never intimidate. After the incident with the HOA officers, Karen was livid. She couldn't believe that someone had dared to challenge her authority, especially in front of the whole neighborhood. Instead of backing down, she decided to escalate things. Karen made it clear that this wasn't over, declaring an all-out war on my wife and me. It wasn't just about the jog anymore. She was determined to show that she could control everything. So she set her sights on punishing us with a series of ridiculous new rules. The worst one? A fine for having what she called hostile energy, or an intimidating presence during any recreational activity. I mean, seriously? Apparently, you couldn't even walk around your own yard without the threat of being fined if you looked too intimidating. Karen had completely lost it, and it was clear she wasn't going to stop until we were out of the neighborhood. As expected, some of the neighbors stayed quiet, too afraid of the HOA to speak up. They were the ones who just wanted to live their lives without making waves, and Karen's grip on the neighborhood had made them anxious to avoid trouble. But not everyone was staying silent. Slowly, other residents started to notice the bizarre behavior coming from the HOA. They began questioning the fines, the new rules, and the over-the-top security measures. Karen's power started to slip, and the tension in the neighborhood grew. HOA patrols became more frequent, parking near our house and spying on us, pretending to take notes. One officer even aimed a speed gun at our mailbox. The whole thing felt like a bad joke, but it wasn't funny anymore. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were harassing us. Meanwhile, my wife remained cool as ever. While Karen was busy making things worse, my wife was quietly preparing for the HOA's next move. She wasn't going to fight back with force. That wasn't her style. Instead, she knew that patience and intelligence would win this battle. She started to gather information, studying the HOA's actions and looking for weaknesses. It wasn't about confrontation. It was about dismantling Karen's authority without ever having to throw a punch. My wife wasn't rattled by any of this. She was already thinking 5 steps ahead, planning how to use the HOA's own mistakes against them. She knew the truth. Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. Things took a sharp turn when the body cam footage from the incident with the HOA officers somehow leaked online. It didn't take long for the whole neighborhood to see exactly what had happened. The footage was clear, and the truth was out there for everyone to see. My wife had been doing nothing more than jogging when she was confronted and threatened by these so-called security officers. The moment they tried to point a gun at her, she handled it with total control, disarming the guy in seconds. As soon as the video hit the internet, the narrative that the HOA had been pushing began to unravel. No longer could Karen and her team spin the story to make it look like they were the heroes. The residents who had once been too afraid to question the HOA started to take notice. They saw that the HOA wasn't the shining example of authority it had been pretending to be. The real story was out, and it was obvious. Karen's grip on power was slipping. As the footage spread, so did the public's opinion. The neighborhood slowly started to rally behind my wife. People who had been quietly watching the chaos now began to stand up and speak out. Online, the discussion took off, and before long, the memes started pouring in. One of the most popular jokes was, "She should be running the HOA." It was funny, but it was also true. More and more neighbors began to question the legitimacy of Karen's HOA. The rules, the fines, the bizarre power trip, it all seemed completely ridiculous now. The whole situation was starting to feel like a bad joke, and the HOA's authority was crumbling as more people woke up to the fact that they had been living under the control of a group of self-appointed officials who had no real authority. Karen, of course, wasn't going to let this go without a fight. She tried to salvage her image in the most Karen way possible, by holding a live-streamed HOA meeting to set the record straight. She stood there, in front of a camera, claiming that the whole thing had been a violent assault on her officers. She accused my wife of having criminal intent and being a threat to the neighborhood. But all of her words fell flat. The body cam footage was undeniable. As soon as the footage started playing, her defense started to crumble. She had no leg to stand on, and the truth spoke for itself. It was clear to everyone watching that Karen wasn't the one in charge here anymore. The HOA's reputation was in shambles. After the public exposure of their actions, the HOA wasn't ready to admit defeat. Instead, they doubled down. Karen and her team started pushing even harder, creating new and even more ridiculous rules. There were fines for things like excessive neighborliness and unapproved socializing. They even added a penalty for any unwelcome energy at HOA events. The rules were nonsensical, but that didn't stop them from trying to enforce them. Things got even uglier when the HOA filed a restraining order against my wife, claiming she had engaged in militant behavior and psychological warfare. It was all nonsense, designed to intimidate us into backing down. But the HOA wasn't stopping there. Their patrols became more aggressive. They started showing up at our house multiple times a day, parking nearby and even watching us through binoculars. It was clear they were trying to provoke us, but my wife wasn't the type to give in to petty harassment. She stayed calm, knowing that these moves were only making them look more desperate. My wife, always thinking ahead, decided to take a different route, one that would hit the HOA where it really hurt. Instead of reacting emotionally, she started quietly investigating. She began digging into the HOA's financial records, and what she found was beyond shocking. She uncovered a web of corruption, with thousands of dollars being misused for personal gain. The HOA had been funneling money through a landscaping company called Verdant Horizon LLC. The problem? The company didn't actually exist. It was a shell company set up by one of the HOA board members. The HOA had paid this fake company nearly $180,000 for landscaping projects that had never been done. There were no fountains, no road repairs, no garden upgrades, just empty promises and a lot of missing money. My wife cross-referenced the payments with the security footage from our cameras, which showed no work being done on the dates the HOA had listed. With this evidence in hand, she set the stage for a serious legal battle. As this information spread, our neighbors began to wake up. They had been paying into the HOA without asking questions, but now, with proof of fraud and corruption on the table, they started to question everything. The flyers my wife created, filled with audit results and legal documentation, were distributed door to door. People were shocked to see how much of their money had been wasted. And worse, how they had been fined for things that weren't even legal. The community, which had been divided before, started to come together. More and more residents began questioning their own fines and violations. The tide was turning, and it was clear that the HOA's control was crumbling. As the support for us grew, the HOA's power continued to shrink, and Karen was starting to feel the heat. The final showdown came at a city council hearing. The HOA had called a special session to defend itself against the mounting accusations, and we knew this would be our chance to put an end to Karen's reign of terror. My wife and I walked into the room, calm and ready. She had gathered everything: records, documents, audit reports, and proof of the HOA's financial corruption. She didn't get emotional or loud. She was simply professional, methodical, and precise. Standing before the council, she laid out the case, outlining how the HOA had misused funds, imposed illegal fines, and used its power to harass and intimidate residents. She showed the fraudulent landscaping company, the fake bills, and the inflated fines. There was no arguing with the facts. Everything she presented was clear, undeniable, and well supported. As she spoke, you could see Karen's confidence waver. Her defense was weak at best, and as the evidence mounted, it was impossible for anyone to ignore the truth. By the end of my wife's presentation, the HOA's actions were deemed illegal, and the council officially declared that the HOA had overstepped its boundaries and needed to be dismantled. Karen's complete collapse came next, and it was almost painful to watch. She tried to defend herself with a presentation of her own, but it was a mess. The slides were poorly made, the images were clearly fake, and her arguments were full of holes. She even tried to claim that my wife had been part of a coordinated conspiracy to attack the HOA. The judge didn't even let her finish. With a simple dismissive gesture, he threw her case out. The evidence against her was too strong, and there was no denying it. The HOA was officially dissolved. Karen, who had once run the neighborhood with an iron fist, was now left with nothing. The community had spoken, and the truth had won out. It was a huge victory, not just for us, but for everyone who had been suffering under her control. After the HOA was finally dismantled, life in the neighborhood began to change for the better. The heavy atmosphere that had been hanging over everyone slowly lifted. People started smiling and chatting again, something that hadn't really happened since we moved in. There was a new sense of freedom as the residents realized they no longer had to live in fear of being fined or harassed for every little thing. The HOA's ridiculous rules were gone, and it felt like a weight had been lifted. For my wife and me, things returned to normal as well. My wife went back to her morning jogs, enjoying the peace she'd been craving. She spent time in the garden, tending to her plants, and sometimes I'd find her on the porch sipping tea, watching the world go by. As for me, I got back to my work, coding away, and making sure our security system was still running smoothly. The tension that had been brewing for months was finally gone, and the neighborhood seemed to regain its sense of community. People started spending more time outside. Kids were playing again, and it felt like a place where people could actually live without looking over their shoulders. But of course, Karen wasn't done. In a last-ditch effort to cause more trouble, she sent a legal letter to the couple, trying to stir things up once more. It was full of more baseless accusations and threats, but it didn't faze us. At this point, we knew we had already won. We'd seen her throw everything she had at us, and it all came to nothing. My wife just shook her head and laughed it off. She wasn't even worried. Karen's attempt to keep the drama going was just more of the same, empty threats and desperate moves. It was almost laughable, knowing she had no power left. The couple didn't waste time on it. We'd already defeated her, and we had no intention of letting her drag us back into the madness. It was over, and we were finally free. My wife never said much about what happened, even after everything settled down, but I could tell it meant something to her. For once, the fight wasn't in some far-off place. It was right here, in our front yard. And she didn't fight it with weapons or tactics, at least not the kind you'd expect. She fought with calm, with facts, with patience. She wanted peace, and she earned it, not just for us, but for everyone on our street. The morning after Karen's last failed attempt, my wife went for another jog. Same route, same pace, no badge, no nonsense. This time, though, she was met with waves, nods, even a thumbs up from a neighbor. No one was watching from a golf cart. No one was writing down notes. And for me, standing there with a cup of coffee, I finally saw what normal could feel like. After months of living under fake laws and ridiculous rules, the silence wasn't tense anymore. It was just quiet. The good kind. Even now, I know this probably won't be the last time we deal with something like this. People like Karen don't really disappear. They pop up somewhere else with a new title and a fresh clipboard. And honestly, part of me thinks we'll see another version of this mess eventually. But this time, the neighborhood knows what it looks like when someone stands up and says, "No, that's not okay." My wife didn't just shut down a power-hungry HOA. She reminded everyone what real strength looks like. Not loud, not showy, just steady and smart. We still get the occasional note in the mailbox, usually anonymous, thanking us. And there's even talk of starting a real community board, one that's fair, simple, and actually focused on helping people. So for now, we've found peace. But if someone ever tries to take it again, let's just say, we're ready.